Hello, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm painting on canvas, but on the canvas I put 3 layers of gesso on top, just so I can move the paint around a little bit without showing the canvas texture. I'm starting with some liquid as my medium, and I'm only using 3 colors to start: phthalo blue, cobalt blue, and cadmium yellow. I also have titanium white and Payne's gray to help me adjust the brightness of the colors. Today, what I'm using to paint with, just a few cheap 2-inch brushes for most of the painting, plus a few of my softer brushes when I need to blend. Today I wanted to officially introduce myself just a bit more and talk about how to use the wet on wet technique to mix colors in a painting without having to use multiple layers. This saves you a lot of time, as you don't have to complete a painting, wait for all the paint to dry, then do another layer, then another, and have to worry about paint cracking if you don't follow the rules of painting. But we'll talk about those another day. A few introductions and disclaimers about me and my channel. First, my name is Dom. I'm a substance use counselor by day and oil painter by night. Well, by morning. As cool as it would sound to be an oil painter by night, I just love the way the light comes through my windows in the morning. Anyway, I would describe myself as either an intermediate artist or as someone who has found a style that he loves and is constantly trying to grow and to improve. I got my start painting about 5 years ago. I started getting interested in Bob Ross's PBS specials, and I watched them all the time. Obviously, he had passed away, and I was watching them on Netflix. My wife must have noticed my interest, and she got me a beginner Bob Ross painting set as a gift. As you can expect, I was super excited, and I started painting in the middle of our bedroom in our apartment. I had no idea how messy painting could be. I didn't bring any paper towels to wipe off my brushes, and I had generally no idea how to use mediums to get paint to stick differently. I ended up with what, to me, looked like something a 2-year-old could have painted. However, now I know better. Children are some of the best artists on the planet, but that's a topic again for another day. My wife was nothing but supportive after my initial disappointment on my first oil painting, and she ended up telling me the truest advice I would ever learn. Just keep practicing, and you'll get better. And so I did. And honestly, if you're not happy with your paintings, paint more and more and more and more until you start to see improvements. Branch out and try different things and see what you like. I found out that I love painting landscapes, and I'm just not as interested in painting people. I wanted to paint places that I would want to go, places that would be interesting or calming or epic. And in that way, painting became my happy place. Now into the topic of the day. So I've started to use the wet on wet technique. This is the process of continuing to paint on a canvas after already applying a layer of paint, but before the first layer of paint has the chance to dry. Personally, I like this because it adds a bit of spontaneity to a painting, and it helps me be less afraid of just throwing color on the canvas and seeing what jumps out at me. Wet on wet also allows you to mix colors on the canvas. This can be a blessing or a curse. I just used cadmium yellow with the cobalt and phthalo blue mix of the sky, and wouldn't you know it, it turns green. Then, by the time I get to the dry part of the canvas, the color's been picked up, and you get streaks of green in with the yellow at the bottom. This can be used to mimic the look of fields in the sunlight, and that's what I was going for in this painting. You do need to be a little careful with this method, though. If you overmix your colors or apply too much paint to the canvas, your colors can lose their saturation and turn muddy. One of the ways to avoid this is to have paper towels and Q-tips handy. You can use these to add highlights to the parts of the painting. Doing this will lighten the color and take some paint off the canvas. Then, when you add another color, it doesn't mix as much. This can be easier than adding a lot of thinner to your paint and gently placing it on top of your other wet paint. This is one of the areas that I initially struggled with when I was trying to do the Bob Ross style before I moved to this one. However, if used correctly, this simple process of wiping away, adding paint, and mixing on the canvas can help create detail, but also depth in the horizon line, in the clouds, and even in trees. As you can see here, I've started putting blue back on the brush, and now I'm trying to mix that into the most distant hills. So this creates something called atmospheric perspective. So there are little particles in the air, and as you look out into a vast landscape, those particles take up more and more space, and it turns the more distant objects a shade of blue. So here, I wanted to create a very sharp horizon line, but it needed to be, as somewhat accurate to real life. So adding those blues into the distant hills, mountains, I don't really quite know what they are, but doing that really helps sell the distance of how far away those are. Now, when approaching a sky, I try to not really have any plans and just create some shapes or some streaks in the sky just to make something interesting. Clouds are very free things. They float about in the sky. They're not always just fluffy yellow things that hang out and do nothing all day. But at the same time, I do like it to match the mood of the painting that I'm in. So for this one, I wanted at least some clouds that just laid flat over the landscape, because I wanted the landscape to feel more vast. So I had these kind of large but flat on the bottom clouds, and I wanted those to feel like they were farther back in the distance. And then I have these streaky things on the right, because I wanted to use them to draw attention to the clouds that I had on the left, and hopefully then attention to the landscape. Now here you can see me, I'm using the paper towel, just like I talked about, to take some paint off of these clouds, so that when I eventually add in more paint, they don't mix too much and create that mud I was talking about. In addition to using a paper towel, it's also helpful to have softer brushes on hand, because when you swipe away paint, it starts to take brush marks out. Now, I don't hate brush marks. I think that they tend to look good in a painting, because you want to prove that you have painted something. I never really like looking at paintings that look exactly like pictures. I think it's incredible, and I think people are extremely talented who do it. It's just not what I'm interested in. When I look at a painting, I want to know that it was a painting and not think, oh, wow, that's a picture. And then when I look up closer, say, oh, no, it is a painting. Now, on the canvas, right now, to get these clouds a little bit more cloudy, I'm using a palette knife to add streaks of white. Now, I'm going to go back over these in a second with a softer brush to take out those hard lines. Now, you could keep it on just like this. Maybe add even more as you go along than I'm going to add. I think skies can be really anything. You could use a palette knife to paint your entire sky. You could use a palette knife to paint your entire painting. But for this, I wanted something a little bit softer for the sky. So I ended up blending away. And when you look at this, I know that I have it sped up, but I'm being pretty gentle with this unless the paint's not moving around the way I want it to. Then I add slightly more pressure and keep moving. The goal is to keep parts of that white really pure, really bright, and the other parts you want to mix in. Because clouds, as you're painting them, have natural dark spots and natural brighter spots. Using a palette knife, though, helps you get a little bit of randomness in which spots are bright and which ones aren't, and that can sometimes inform your decisions about how to really bring the cloud to life throughout the course of your painting. Now, you want some kind of gradient, right? Dark at the bottom of a cloud, because obviously it's facing away from the sun. Bright when the sun is hitting and really blasting it, and then a mid-tone, which is what I'm trying to add here with my fan brush. Now, another thing with the wet on wet technique that you're going to find out towards the end of this painting is that it is possible to make really, truly drastic changes in a painting at any point in time. Because again, as long as the paint hasn't dried, you can move it around. You can take it off. You can add more. And I make a very large change in the sky towards the end of this painting. And I'll talk about it once we get there. But even now, if you look at it, I decided that those streaks just weren't working. They were a bit too thick, and they didn't feel right for what I was going for. So I wiped them off, blended them with the other blue, and added a little bit more blue on that top corner. Now, one of the things also, just as a general tip when oil painting, that I find to be helpful, when you're making a sky, at the outset, take your time. Don't just slap down a solid blue sky and then add a gradient in slowly. Add little nooks and crannies, brighter spots, darker spots, places with more color, because you end up getting a more complicated sky. Like behind my clouds right there, you see that there are, little lighter spots and darker spots, and those, are more exciting to look at as a viewer of art. Now, as I'm getting back into the landscape, I have not started using green. This is just the green that mixed on the brush, and a little bit of Payne's Gray added, just to darken it up a little bit. Because something you want, just as you paint whiter and more blue towards the horizon, you want to paint darker closer to you, so it gets that feeling of something coming right up to you. And as you create something, right, and whatever your art is, whether you like landscapes or portrait paintings or still life, try to work on creating a level of distance in your painting. There can be perspective even in portrait paintings. It's a shorter perspective and smaller, but you want art to feel like it's coming up to you or coming at you. I always like to create some sort of way that the viewer can go into the painting. And here, as you can see, I've placed us at the top of a hill, looking down into a valley and out across this landscape. As I'm working on these trees, you'll notice that there is kind of a natural crest to the hill, and I wanted there to be some kind of slope to the left. Now, this can be the natural exit point of the painting, but you oftentimes want to do things to try to keep people in your painting for as long as possible, because the longer they stay in it, the longer they're enjoying it. And for me, that's the real joy of it. Now, another way to create this feeling of having a way to walk into a painting is to create a path. So I used a Q-tip to block out a little path here, and now I'm using just pure titanium white with just the very edge of a palette knife. And I gotta say, when it comes to paintings like this where you're making a path into it, I see a lot of people make this mistake of having the path be too thin at the top. You want that path to really be as wide as possible and thin down relatively quickly. If you look at paths just as you're walking and really take a look at when it comes up to you, it does flare out quite quickly. Now, as I was talking about, and this I think is a good example of it, when you're trying to keep somebody from going off of your painting, it's good to have obstacles in the way. So obviously, in this painting, I have that path going all the way off to the left and then off the painting. However, the point of this painting is to stand at the precipice of this hill and look out at how far this landscape really goes into the distance. Now, by breaking up that path by those 3 clumps of trees, really can help to, sell that we're to enjoy the moment. Yes, there is a path to go, and yes, we have some walking to do, but, the farther down I get, the less of this view I'm going to be able to enjoy. Now, a couple other tips about doing landscapes, especially vast ones like this. Anytime you have a darker shape, like a hill or a clump of trees, it is helpful to have some level of distance behind the paint. So on the right, on that first hill, you see the clump of trees, and it's interrupted in the back by a bright streak. The point of this is to show that those trees have a stop and end point, and you don't have to paint each layer at a time to get this effect. You just need a Q-tip and wet paint. I'm even doing it here at the top of this hill. I'm brightening a field behind that hill to give this impression that the light is going behind that hill. And now we're coming up on the big change. So in just a second, I'm about to grab a big paper towel and do something drastic. So instead of finishing the sky and finishing these clouds, I decided that it was pulling too much focus away from the view that I wanted to come up with here. Because I wanted this feeling of journey, of adventure, and we need to be focused on the ground for that. So, like I said, I had giant clouds in the sky, and all it took was a couple wipes of paper towel, and now they're gone. However, you can see a little bit of what I was talking about with overmixing and mud. Where those clouds were is now this kind of dull gray color. So to fix that, I'm adding a little bit more paint on top, and I'm going to blend this paint so that you get, again, that feeling of a clear sky without as much muddy texture from those clouds. So that's going to go away. Again, as I said, you don't want to put too much paint on the top of a painting, and I am coming right up on the edge of it here. I'm adding a lot of paint because I've overmixed the paint on this brush. And so like I said, as an intermediate painter, these are things that you start learning a little bit more about. And if you're a beginner, you are bound to do this at some point. However, to correct it, I just used a much more gentle touch on this brush, and I made sure to wipe off the brush plenty of times as I was doing this mixing. Obviously, it's sped up, so you're not going to see it as much. But the texture and the colors from before, they really came through here, and so you still don't get just a pure gradient. I even left some of those flat clouds farther away to continue to sell that sense of distance. Now, this brush that I'm using right now is a little bit more expensive. It's a blending brush that has just really soft bristles, and I tend to use it for blending when I want something to really lose as many brush marks as possible. Now, also though, one way to create distance in a painting, even when there are few to no clouds in the sky, is, like I've been saying, create a gradient or a vignette. This is a setting on most phones now. They'll even do it for you. But the point is to have a darker blue or a darker color in the top corners and the top of a painting. And the more circular you can create it and have that blue creep down the sides, it sells that perspective in the sky that what is directly above you is that darker blue, and as you move farther away into the sky, it gets lighter and lighter. So, I wanted to thank you for spending these 20-ish minutes with me, if you made it this long. I hope that some of the things that I said were helpful to you, and I look forward to spending more time with everybody, doing more paintings, and just telling you a little bit about what I wish I had known when I had started painting. I think painting is a continuous learning process, and you should always be looking for ways to grow. So, this painting is called Blue Skies Ahead, and I'll see you in the next video. Good luck and happy painting.